Hello, I'm Michael Culleton, conductor of choirs at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, welcoming you to our Facebook Watch Party event. Tonight we're going to hear from Dr. René Clausen as he approaches the end of his 34 years of teaching at Concordia College. We'll enjoy a dialogue between him and Peter Halverson. Many of you know Peter as the voice of God at the Christmas concerts. I was lucky to have experienced both of these men as mentors and teachers and professors in my time as a student at Concordia College. We'll hear from the Concordia Choir following the dialogue, and they'll share pieces from this year, from recent years, and even from the homecoming experience that many of you may have been at this past October when we celebrated the legacy of Dr. Clausen with a reunion choir. Let me say on behalf of Concordia College, we hope that you and yours are safe and well in these strange days. We do wish we could have done this in person with you back in March, but we'll use this technology to join you tonight in this fashion. So I hope that you'll enjoy this conversation with these two very special, I dare say, legends of music at Concordia, Peter Halverson and René Clausen, and music from the Concordia Choir. Thanks again for being with us, and continue to be well.
Well, Renee, we are certainly doing our part in social distancing, being in each of our own living rooms and not in the same room, but it's always great to see you and have a chance to visit. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation with you and having a chance to kind of reflect on your life in music and in particular your time at Concordia. But I thought it might be nice to start out with talking a little bit about your recent tour, and perhaps things like the reception you found, maybe talk a little bit about the tour program itself and this choir. I know, having a number of these students, it's a wonderful choir with good senior leadership, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that. But of course, with the spread of the coronavirus, you had to cut your tour short. And maybe you could talk about the power of music, and how in a time like this, with this pandemic, how it truly can be an uplifting thing in a difficult time. So if you could share a little bit about that to get started.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think maybe the first thing I would want to say was that I felt really privileged to have a wonderful group of students on this tour this year. We stayed amazingly healthy. And everyone took great precautions to stay well and stay healthy. And I was particularly pleased with the way they sang so consistently every night. And especially through that first week or so, we had a lot of full houses and standing room only houses. And of course, that's always inspiring to a group of students. So I think the first thing I would say is I felt very fortunate to have such a wonderful choir, especially this last Concordia choir that I have. I think we all kind of felt there was something special about that, and it didn't end quite the way we had hoped, but yet as I look back through the tour, and as we faced some issues regarding the spread of the coronavirus, we also felt, I think all of us, that each concert that we did, we were closing the circle of communication that I talk about all the time with Concordia Choir, that we're just half the circle and the other half is those who listen. And I felt that power coming from the choir every night, that connection to them of making music of the moment, this ephemeral art that we do. It's here and then it's gone, but it exists and continues to remain in the memories of many people who we touched on this tour. It really, especially at this time, I think, when we're really facing as a nation something that's quite unprecedented.
Exactly.
But as I've seen in what other choral directors have posted and are talking about, virtually all of them are offering some recording of a choir they heard, or a YouTube recording of a particular text that's especially comforting or connecting. I think we all know as musicians that when it comes down to making artistry, you can't define it.
Mm-hmm.
It's that special something that happens that there aren't quite enough words or the right words to describe that feeling of just being wholly committed musically, emotionally, vocally. And that was really extraordinary, I think, this year is the way the students handled themselves, the way they handled adversity when we had to face adversity.
Mm-hmm.
They really showed their maturity. And I've heard you talk about that word grit. I remember, I think the choir really showed their grit in doing what we needed to do, singing great concerts, but then, dealing with what happened. And, it happened. So
Right.
we just dealt with it.
Well, I know I talked to one of my students because we're still teaching. And I got a sense from him that he had a sense, and maybe the whole choir had a sense, that when you came to Nashville, that it might well be their last concert. And if this was a senior, so he was talking that they had a premonition, this might be the last time we get to sing in the Concordia Choir. And of course, that's turning out to be the case. And I'm sure you do too, kind of feel for those seniors who don't quite have that closure. But he made it sound like that was a very special concert and that the choir really kind of gave it their all, and it was a very special evening of music making.
There was an energy in the air
Yeah.
that I think was palpable to everyone in the choir, and I felt that as we were proceeding through the concert. But as you know, I get into the concert, and I think for both the singers and myself, you have to focus on what you're doing.
Exactly.
And I've talked about the idea that the Creator put your voice halfway between your head and your heart, and you need both of them to perform.
Right.
So I still recall focusing on what I needed to accomplish, that if this indeed was going to be our last one, let's make it really good. Put it all out there. And I remember I was focusing on that, but when we came to Beautiful Savior at the close of the last cadence of Beautiful Savior, I remember picking up my folder of music from the piano, and I just had this feeling that was going to be the last one. That was an unusual feeling, but at the same time, I was among the students that I love, and it was good.
That's special. Well, maybe we could take a journey back a little bit. I know I am interested, but I think a lot of people may be in, how does someone like René Clausen, get started in all this? And, maybe talk a little bit about the influences in your life that led you on this path, both people and experiences. If you can recall, I'm sure you can, people and experiences you had at younger points in your life that kind of put you on this path of music.
I was really fortunate, Peter, that in high school, and I wound up going for most of my junior high and high school years were in the Los Angeles City School District out at the west end of the San Fernando Valley. And I went to a wonderful high school, Chatsworth High School. And I still think back to two particular men, John Pope, who was my band director, and Don Gustafson, who was my choir director. And they were music teachers in the true sense of the word, in that they put their life into their students. I remember being in 10th grade and singing tenor, believe it or not. My voice was somewhere between tenor and baritone at that point, but I was singing tenor. And our high school choir of 10th through 12th graders did the entire Bach Magnificat.
Wow.
And, when you think of that, that was just a major undertaking. And all of the soloists and even the accompanists were from the choir. and how he challenged us to do wonderful music. So I was exposed right away to doing great music in choir. And I was also taking a music theory class that the high school offered at that point. And so I became immediately interested in composition and arranging. I've actually found music theory pretty easy, and liked. That was my favorite class at that point, was learning music theory. I know a lot of music theory students would beg to disagree with me on loving music theory. Right. But anyway, something that happened was there was it was actually the Kodak company, and this was back in the late 60s, who sponsored a show that was on every Sunday night called The Wonderful World of Disney. And the Kodak theme came on, at commercial breaks, which was this wonderful sweet tune, "Where are you going, my little one?"
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And I was really attracted to that melody. But what was interesting, it's kind of funny that for 3 weeks in a row, I would just wait for the commercials and then write down a few more notes, and then wait for the next one so I could write down a few more notes and get all the words. And what I wound up doing was making an arrangement. My high school choir director, Don Gustafson, said, "Well, why don't you make an arrangement for our girls' glee club of that tune?" So I did, and it was like one of the first things that I arranged, and it was for a 3-part SSA and piano. And I just thought that was the greatest thing, to be able to do that. And then he said, "Well, if you've done that, now you have to come in and teach it to the girls." So that led to a conducting experience. And I still remember to this day how much I enjoyed being in front and teaching this tune. And so I remember teaching it to them, and he said, "Well, then, now that you've rehearsed them, you have to conduct it in the concert." So I did, and it was, that's quite an experience for a high school. I was in 10th grade at that point, and I had a similar experience with our band director, John Pope. He and this was pretty big at this time in Southern California. Was what our jazz bands, or what we call big bands at that point, where we're based on the kind of 1940s, right. Tommy Dorsey, Glenn Miller, those type of bands. And we had 2 of them in the high school, and I was playing saxophone in one of them. And I made an arrangement. There was let me see, it was about it would have been about 1968. I think it was Diane Carroll. It was a ballad called "This Guy's in Love with You."
Right.
This sweet ballad tune. "You see this guy's in love with you." Right. Anyway, so he said, "Why don't you make an arrangement of that for our jazz band?" So what I did then was study instrumentation. What were the ranges of all the instruments? I started actually playing trumpet about that point. And the reason I started to play trumpet is that our band was chosen to march on the Rose Parade in 1968. And I remember Bob Hope was the Grand Marshal of the parade. Anyway, I had a lot of experience in high school learning to play different instruments. And one of the great things that was available to me is that I could just check out what was called the Rubank Methods. It's a blue book of, you remember that? And I could check out an instrument and check out a Rubank Methods, and then just go home and learn to play instruments. And so I've always felt comfortable, not only being in front of an instrumental organization, but because I played I think, I mean, most of my life I was playing an instrument, and I remember there was one time and was playing E flat alto saxophone in the jazz band and flute in the jazz band, and our band director said, we don't have any French horns in the orchestra, which met, it was a fledgling orchestra, met before school at 7 o'clock. So he sent me home with a French horn, and I was the only French horn in the orchestra.
Oh my goodness.
And then I was playing trumpet in the marching band. And then I was a member of what was called the West Valley Youth Band, which met on Monday nights. And our director, Bob Delwart, had announced that in a couple weekends we were going to go play a concert in Disneyland, which wasn't very far away. It was about half hour away from where we live. But they had this thing at Disneyland where if you brought your high school band, or in this case, this was our community, it was a youth community band, and played in what they called the Electric Parade. It always happened at the time of dusk. So all the lights in Disneyland Tinker Bell came down the rope from the top of the Matterhorn. And so it was basically to play a parade, and then they let the whole band in for free. So we were planning this, and it happened that the tubist, we only had one, had another plan or something that affected his ability not to come. And so Bob Delwart sent me home with a 2-piece sousaphone. Remember, it was made out of white fiberglass, I think, and he said, why don't you learn how to play this? And then you can be our tubist for when we march in the Disney Electric Parade. And so I quickly figured out that, the couple of marches that we played, they're in flat keys, B flat or E flat, so a couple of suites of marches. And I figured out if I can play 1, 4, and 5 in those 2 keys, I could just kind of make up things that went along.
Good.
So it was a time where I was just learning a lot about instruments and instrumentation, and had these wonderful teachers who gave me the opportunity. And I'm still so grateful to them that they gave me these initial opportunities to discover who I was going to be.
Yeah, that always seems to be the case. There's a teacher there that really influences a student and encourages them to go on. In terms of composition, I think I remember you talking one time that maybe you were back in Iowa, but you had friends, was it a bassoonist and a French horn, or you had this odd trio, and you
remember that? Yeah, I think that's kind of a fun one to recall. I had said too that I spent most of my years in high school and junior high in California, but we moved to Iowa right before my senior year in high school. So that was quite a dramatic shift to go from it was about 1,500 in my class and to about 30 in my graduating class in this little town in Iowa. Anyway, yes, it was during that senior year in Iowa, and a couple of friends. One played bassoon, another played French horn, and the other bass clarinet.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay.
It was bass clarinet, French horn, and bassoon, and they wanted to play a trio at the regional music contest. I think it was district small group contest. Okay. Well, there aren't many compositions written for French horn and bassoon, bass clarinet. So what I did was I created a theme and variations on Light My Fire by The Doors. It was a rock band at that time. And so I created a series of 3 Baroque variations using augmentation in one movement, and then another one I created a kind of Baroque bass line for the bass clarinet. It was bum 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 bum. It was kind of fun, and then put the tune in the French horn, and then I figured that I know there was a total of 3, and so. We were practicing in the French hornist basement, getting ready for the district contest. I mean, I wasn't playing; I was just kind of there. But we were practicing down there, and the father of the hornist was coming down the basement stairs. And I remember she said to her dad, she goes, "What does it sound like?" And he replied to her, says, "Sounds like hell to me." And, and so we were trying to determine what we were going to name this piece. And so we went to our band director, Bill Holt, and he figured out, he spoke German quite well. And we figured out we better not call it variations on Light My Fire. The judge may not think that esoteric enough, whatever. So he named it Wie zum Teufel, which means like the devil in German. And the kicker to that story is that they got a 1 at district, and then they brought it to regional and got a 1 at regional, and then actually went to the state contest in Des Moines and got a 1 there too. So that was, yeah.
That's a great story.
Kind of a fun memory.
So as I recall, you went to St. Olaf and played trumpet and sang. I mean, at one point, did you always know you were going to head down the choral path?
I think I figured that out all in one evening.
Really?
I was so involved in high school in both instrumental and choral. And I had a wonderful experience in high school in California. We didn't really have much of a program in the little town in Iowa. But I need to go back again to my high school choral director, Don Gustafson, because my buddy and I, we were kind of choral nerds, and really started getting into choral music about junior year in high school. And Don said to Michael and I, he said, "You know what, I see that in the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, the next Sunday night, the St. Olaf Choir under Christiansen is coming, and you guys might want to think about attending that concert." Now, we had already attended concerts of several different college choirs in the area, just kind of thinking down the line about college and how important that would be to us. And so indeed we did. We went to downtown Los Angeles to Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, and we saw the St. Olaf Choir under Kenneth Jennings. We expected to see Chris Johnson. He said Chris Johnson. I thought, my gosh. So we expected to see CHRISJOHNSON.
Right.
Well, it was February of 1968, and it was the very first year of Ken Jennings, his very first choir. And we were just blown away. 2 of us were just blown away. So I think they were in Riverside the next night. So we drove to Riverside and saw them there. And then they might have been, I forget where the third one is, but for 3 nights in a row, we went to see the St. Olaf Choir until they were in Bakersfield, and our parents said, no more. These are school nights. But I remember that moment kind of as I'd never heard a choir like that. I'd never heard such an incredible discipline, beauty, interpretation, tone. The whole thing just struck right into me, and I knew I had to do it. It was where kind of the whole path started to lead towards that. An interesting story that kind of surrounds that event is, so that would have been my junior year in high school, and then our senior year in college. I was in the St. Olaf Choir. My buddy was president. I was bass section leader. And in that year, we sang at Dorothy Chandler Pavilion with our high school choral director in the audience. And it was just kind of like coming around full circle. It was an extraordinary time. Yeah.
Well, I think what also comes full circle when you start thinking about all of your students that you've sent out there that are now influencing high school students, college students. I mean, that's pretty remarkable You think of that tree that F. Melius Christiansen started, and now you have continued that in a major way. That has to be a wonderful feeling for you to know, understanding what your choir and band director did for you in California, what you have done for all these students, and what they in turn are continuing to do. I think that's just a wonderful story in and of itself. There's so much to take in just with that. I'm sure you must feel great pride in that.
Well, we, all of us, I think, who are in music and who work with students, who are teachers, whether you're a choral director or a voice teacher or whatever
Right.
You do in any field of teaching, you decide that those students are why you're there.
Right.
And we become the conduits, really, for remembering what we experienced. All of us had some point, I think, in our life that were aha moments, that were moments that we remember with a thrill going up the spine, or that indefinable, inexpressible moment of beauty. And I think what I've tried to remember and tried to tell my students too is you have to remember that moment, especially if you've been out there 10 years and you're starting, or 20 years or 30 years, whatever. And you should be thinking all the time, I think, as you teach, that yes, you may be the one that's making that impression that you had, or creating that experience that you had. So you always have that responsibility. It's kind of the Johnny Appleseed effect. You hope to plant the seeds, and some may lay fallow for a while, and then all of a sudden they sprout up, and it's been a real joy for me to see so many of my students go out and do so well, and now they are affecting the lives of many thousands of young people that they are teaching. That's one of the most satisfying things, I think, to me, is to watch your students grow.
Yeah.
And it's just a very good sense of accomplishment, and
that'll just continue to grow and grow, with their students. Just a little different question. Every year you have to put on the major Christmas concert, which is a huge undertaking, but also the tour program. And I know you spend hours and hours putting together the music for that. Could you just talk a little bit about those two things? Do you enjoy one more than the other? Is one more challenging the other? I know they're both great things for us as audience members, but maybe the perspective of the person who puts all that together and creates that.
They're kind of apples and oranges, the tour concert and the Christmas concert. And I'll just talk a little bit about both and kind of the process that I go through. I'm often asked, when do you start thinking about next year's Christmas concert? And my typical response has been, well, as soon as we're done with the last one. Right. Which is kind of a glib answer, I suppose, but there's a lot of truth to that also. One of the things that I find most challenging is actually settling in on the theme every year. I am grateful that over the 34 years, I don't think I've ever repeated a theme.
Which is amazing.
That's, and I always think there's something that has to be chiseled about those words. It can't be just a group of words that describe a theme. There has to be something that feels solid, that feels poetically, artistically, musically attractive. And every word of the theme of the concert, I think, is important. So I have to admit that my wife Frankie has helped me a lot over the years. I will sit out on the deck and say, "What do you think?" And sometimes I've also thought about, well, where are we? What is the world like right now? How do we communicate our message to an audience of a lot of people who are coming to be cleansed in some ways, coming to be made whole by what is really a worship service in many ways. So first of all, it's that choosing the theme. And once that theme has settled in, then I start putting the pieces together and working with our committee. It really, the old statement that Hillary Clinton made, I think, about it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a lot of people to put on the Christmas concert. And I would be remiss if I didn't say it's the whole team. It's the whole team effort. It's talking with my associate conductor now to replace me, Michael Culleton, to all of our lighting and directors, Brian Duncan, and all of the team that comes together. Orchestra director Kevin Suderlin, all of us. It's really quite a humbling undertaking to see how we all fit the pieces that we need to be responsible together. So I do a lot of asking of questions. I'll ask Michael, what are there particular pieces that you would like to do? Of course, I'm always thinking about what pieces would I like to do with Concordia Choir? What are some large ensemble pieces or mass choir and orchestra pieces that could fit the theme at this point? There really has to develop a rhythm of the kind of the tapestry of how Christmas concert is woven together, so that we don't hear this texture too many times in a row, or if we need to have this mass choir piece at this point. It's like putting together puzzle pieces and making sure they fit. So there's a lot of mutual collaboration that goes on in the Christmas concert, and that's also there's no way I could mention everybody, but all of the people who work together to make Christmas concert work. I've been the artistic director, but it is really all of us that come together to make this very special event happen. And then regarding tour program is a different thing. It has to be a program that students can wear well in their voices, and when they're out for 2 weeks with 1 day off, so they're singing a major concert every night. It has to remain interesting for the choir, as well as interesting and varied for the audiences. Some people that come to a concert would be fine if I did a whole concert of hymns and folk songs and spirituals, and there are others who have a particular bent for Bach or Baroque music or modern music. So in putting together a program, I'm always thinking about not only pieces that I love and want to do, but shaping a program that an audience can find something that they really enjoy. Over the years, I've kind of developed a different attitude about the third set of the concert. And so I've done some things that have been a little unusual that I thought, well, why not think out of the box a little? And I have a few memories, special memories of a few years ago, where in the third set, the choir came out in gowns and tuxedos and actually were almost dancing coming on to the risers. And we did basically an opera set. And it's just stepped out of the box in that way, that you're not just standing there in the blue robes and singing, which is terrific, but it was another educational experience for the students and for the audience, to see them do something different and to do maybe some non-traditional literature.
Well, I also think, I remember that, I love that, by the way. But I think that was also an example of you taking advantage of the wonderful singers you had that year. And knowing that you had, so to speak, the horses to really, do that big music.
Exactly right.
And it was exciting. And I know that those students loved that. Were there other, I know that you've kind of thought out of the box, other examples of that you really were very special to you, that you did some different things?
Yeah, a couple years ago, the third set was all about light,
Mm.
and we did this piece called Stars,
Mm.
and
Right.
we actually performed this in the dark with a star field generator that
Mm.
completely filled the auditorium with stars, and it was like literally like you were outside
Mm.
in the night, beautiful night, and this very elegiac tone poem, uh, which was it's a gorgeous piece. It's always a question of, you know, what's appropriate, what's you don't want it to be a cheap trick. You know, it has to work and it has to grow organically out of the music.
Right.
But you know, I remember that being a special experience, and the audience didn't know what was coming, and and I think that really did add to create this wonderful ambiance. And yeah, we also surrounded the audience in that set with John Rutter Luke's Eterna, in which the kids were all holding a candle, talking about light eternal. And you know, it's been fun to create a set that has a particular theme like that, or extending the choir out from its traditional formation to surround the audience. It was quite a few homecoming programs. I mean, I'm talking about, it must be 25 years ago, that actually began the homecoming concert with the choir behind the shell, with the James Erb Shenandoah,
Right.
which is a rich and beautiful and ethereal setting of that wonderful folk tune. And so we actually began the concert behind the shell, and of course the you know, the construction of Memorial Auditorium, it's kind of a big echo chamber back there, and so it the sound met the audience in a totally different way. So doing things like that, I've found
Yeah.
interesting and,
Well, I think
also educational.
yeah, I think you've had a great instinct for things, and I'm sure it is. You kind of think about, can I try this? Is this going to work? But I think you've had a great instinct for that. Having been at all those concerts, they were incredibly successful. Now, I think we'd all like to hear. I mean, it's amazing to me all the compositions that you have done over the years, and I think, you know, I'd like to hear about what you consider. I mean, you've done a lot of octavo pieces. You've done major works. I was disappointed this year not to at the home concert. I was looking forward to your Ovos Omnes, which I believe you composed before you came to Concordia. And if you could talk about, you know, all the special compositions, but I just wanted to ask, I know that you did your doctoral dissertation on choral works of Knut Nystedt, at least I believe. Was there any influence there into Ovos Omnes? Was that kind of a time you were studying him that you composed that, and then maybe go into other compositions that you've done?
You know, I hadn't thought about that much, but as I look at especially a few of the later compositions of Knut Nystedt that I studied in connection with my dissertation, I can see an influence there, particularly of harmonic language, that maybe snuck into a piece like Ovos Omnes.
Which is a wonderful piece. I love
Thank
your
you.
piece.
It's a unique piece in my writing in some ways. I mean, it begins bitonally,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which is maybe an Ives influence. I'm not sure, but the whole sense of that piece is really creating the drama from these various texts. All you who pass by, see if there is any sorrow like unto my sorrow. The poem of Christ on the way to the cross.
Yeah.
And it really struck me when I was writing it, that I think maybe from the standpoint of Nystedt, he was largely involved in choral color and harmonic color, and we see a lot of that in Ovos Omnes, harmonic color and choral color.
Mm-hmm.
Unexpected chordal progressions, sometimes that are rather difficult to hear. but it's still in my own thinking one of my most satisfying pieces. And the choir this year, and, you know, when you were speaking about when you have the horses,
Yeah.
and you have to have soloists in this choir, and you have to have ears, and I just thought this is the group that can do this piece, and they did a wonderful job with it.
Yeah. How about other compositions? I mean, obviously, just a couple years ago, you had the major Passion of Jesus Christ. Uh, you know, you've had, you know, the memorial back after 9/11. It's just some incredible ones. There's so many more, but maybe you could just speak to the meaning of being able to do those, and being able to have them performed, to have conducted them. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, of course, you would remember Memorial, as you were the major soloist in that piece, which you did so beautifully. That does stand in my mind, that along with a couple other pieces, as maybe some of the most, I guess, music that I've written that has had a beneficial influence on those who have heard it. I remember when we did Memorial in New York City that we had to do 3 performances in a day of a work that was a pretty big sing for you and for everybody else.
I remember.
Yeah, and those first 2 performances were for the National ACDA convention, so it was only the conventioners, attendees, that were allowed to go to Lincoln Center. But then we did the final performance in the church, and that will always remain in my mind because New Yorkers were invited to that performance. And again, when you talk about electricity or whatever in the air, there was just this special energy that was going on in that room. And I remember when we finished and I had the baton in my hand and I just laid the baton down on the podium, and I did not really know what to do. It is one of those moments where I think it was at least 30, 40 seconds, and I just stood there. And all you heard was the occasional sniffle in the audience. It was just that time after a very powerful and emotional experience. And I think of how we connected, how we connected the choir and the orchestra to the audience, and it was cleansing. I think it was cleansing for everyone. And art has that ability.
Speaks the power of music again.
And the power of music as a time of healing, which we face right now. We're in another kind of war, but I do think that the power of music and the healing power of music, it connects us as human beings.
Well, we're probably running out of time a little here, but there's so much more I'd like to talk. I just have to ask, you know, over the years, I've heard your choirs every year, and I just have to say how impressed I am every year, because sometimes you lose a third or half of your choir. And yet, you still are able to have this wonderful choral sound of excellence every year. I mean, could you just, you know, briefly talk about what does it take to really make that sound year in and year out when you have basically a different choir every year?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a couple of reactions I would have is, first of all, program for the choir that you have.
Right.
That, you know, yes, Concordia Choir can do a lot of different styles of pieces, but there's maybe a piece on a certain year that you don't have as many low basses as you need, or you don't have the soprano soloist that you really need for this piece, or whatever. So I think part of that is programming that will show off your choir resources to the best of their ability. But maybe further than that, what I've always thought of myself as in many ways a voice teacher, which is you know, you as and all of our voice staff as teachers maybe see them an hour a week, and I see them an hour and a half a day. One of the things that I'm really insist upon from my own point of view is that I'm asking them to sing in a healthy way and teaching them good vocal habits, vocal technique that they can use for a lifetime of singing.
Right.
And so I try to work with the sections in developing the sound of the choir every year, based on that which I hear internally as the kind of the choral sound I'm looking to create. But then using and really working at the time at the beginning of the rehearsal, the warm-up period is really not just warming up the voice, but also a pedagogical time that I am responsible for how these students sing technically. So I hope that's reflected in the choir every year, is that no matter what changes, or if I lose, I remember one year I lost 52 students, that it still comes back to taking those students, working with them daily to create a beautiful sound. So that's been my goal, is to create beautiful sound with the students that I have there.
And you've been very successful at that. It's hard for me to believe, as someone who has taught with you all your time at Concordia and a good friend, so hard to believe that your time at Concordia is coming to an end. But what do you see in the future? What are you most looking forward to as you end this time here? I know you're going to continue probably composing, but any projects that you have in mind that you would love to do?
Yes, I think, and I always will compose, and I'll compose choral music, and I'll compose orchestral music. I'm particularly interested in writing some more sheerly instrumental music. But a project that's been on my mind for a number of years is to write a major work for the theater, a musical. And I guess Stephen Sondheim, he's one of my idols in musical theater, he describes his pieces as stage pieces rather than musicals.
Right.
But I have found especially the last decade maybe, that many of the newer musicals just aren't very well written. They're often too high for the men and too low for the women. Been largely influenced by patter rhythms and word rhythms. I'm not hearing as much beautiful melody for students to sing. I grew up with Rodgers and Hammerstein and Rodgers and Hart, and the great musicals that had beautiful tunes to sing. And I feel an educational pull to write a musical that hopefully would be threaded with beautiful melodies, a plot that would be attractive to especially young people, I'm thinking, high school and college age, that they could really get their teeth into on every level. So that is something that I'm hoping I'll be able to do.
Well, as a singer, and speaking for all singers, we hope you do. We would love that. Maybe in closing, one of the things that's been wonderful for Concordia is having the choir able to tour and be able to reach throughout the whole United States and internationally, and really bringing that message and mission of the college and the choir. And it was a real pleasure to introduce last fall this the Endowed Legacy Fund bearing your name that's going to help support touring in the future. And maybe you could just, in closing, speak a little bit about that and the importance of that to maintain the presence of the choir and choral music in this country and beyond.
Of course, I think one of the marvelous traditions about choral music and Concordia, and particularly the Concordia Choir, is its touring tradition, that this choir has, for many decades, always taken a major tour, which attracts students to the college. I can think across my decades here, how many students came to Concordia because they wanted to be in the Concordia Choir. I am particularly grateful that at this time, when the pie is always getting smaller for every institution, and there are so many needs, that I'm grateful to the college for creating this Endowed Legacy Fund in my name. And I would like to just at this point just say a sincere thank you from my heart to those who have chosen to contribute to this fund. I know that many former choir members have done this, and I think it's because of their experience in choir, their love for the choir, their passion for the choir, and wanting to see it continue. Mm-hmm. So I'm grateful to all of you. I hold so many special memories of so many of you that were in choir with me, and so I say thank you. Live long and prosper.
Well, with that, I, on behalf of the college, the music department, the choir, the choral program, and personally, would like to thank you for your 34 years of dedicated service to Concordia. And thank you for sharing this time with us. It's been a real pleasure for me.
Thank you, Peter. Me too.
Sing and pray myself away.